Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Detections with your hosts, Understudy 77 and
Exiled Atreides.
Oh, you were going slow. I went mellow that time.
Yeah,
I actually kind of like the mellow.
And I went close to the mic too. I figured that would be different enough for introductions.
Yeah, it sounded like her mouth was up on mic. But yeah, I figured I'd go mellow. I'm in a mellow mood. Mellow is where my head is. I'm tired and exhausted and all that stuff. So I'm gonna stick with mellow.
And you've got an R&R weekend coming up. Well, hopefully an R&R weekend coming up.
We'll see. I hope so, but I will be in the woods. So by the time everybody listens to this, I'll be back from the woods. So perhaps I should say, "Oh, I'm so rested and relaxed, and it's wonderful." Hopefully that actually ends up being the case.
Yes. Channel that.
Right? And sorry, so last week, as everybody knows, mental health is a big thing. Both Exiled and I were just exhausted.
Yep.
And just really, we missed a night, and then we were going to try again, and then we missed that, and it's just, busyness and tiredness and general feelings of exhaustion.
And though, we were trying to record on Sunday, but I had to be like, nope, I'm not available in the afternoon because I did have a good thing.
I wasn't available in the afternoon either, man.
Yeah. But I was pretty excited to see these friends that are like family to me. Got to go see their twin 2-week-old babies.
Nice.
So I was super excited to go see my nieces.
I believe it. But, I mean, it happens. Every once in a while, we're going to take a week off or so.
Yep.
It's good for the mental health. And believe it or not, while we have a lot of fun doing this, it is work. And it does take some work to do. So, every once in a while, a little reset is not a bad thing. No. So, while we apologize that we did not get you content last week, you'll all be fine.
Hopefully, everyone else took a moment to take a break the same weekend.
Oh, yeah. And on that, so public service announcement, and I don't know if Detections is the cause for it or whatever, but it's probably worth before I offend somebody. If you find me on LinkedIn, I'm not particularly hard to find. I'm pretty sure that I have Detections on my LinkedIn profile. But if you find me on LinkedIn, know that I actually keep my professional network pretty tight. I'm very picky about it. I don't accept random requests. With that said, if you find my LinkedIn through the podcast and would like to connect, just add a message that says found you through Detections, would like to connect, and I'll probably approve you. Otherwise, you'll just sit in unapproved hell forever, because I don't actually deny anybody, but I don't approve people either unless they've sent me some kind of a notification of where I know them from or who they are or why they want to connect with me. One of the things about being a hiring manager is I get hit up constantly, and I mean recruiters too, right? Between recruiters and hiring managers, I'm constantly getting LinkedIn requests. So, I don't want to miss the people who found me from this, because we're all a little group of happy friends, and I love talking to people who listen to the podcast. But at the same time, just you got to tell me. Otherwise, you're just going to stay in that limbo forever. LinkedIn, I think, is the only service. No, that's not true. Facebook's the same. I completely and totally ignore all of the stuff on Facebook. If I don't know the person, I ignore them too. I don't hit decline. I just don't do anything. So
that means if you've sent a request previously, just update it with a message.
Mm-hmm. The other public service announcement is it's a good time to pick up a new hobby. So when we were supposed to be recording, I built a big Lego set last week. I've actually taken to building Legos a lot during quarantine. It's nice. It's something that I can do solo with my hands, kind of like a puzzle. It's just an enjoyable thing to do. So it's been helpful for my own mental health, I think, is building Lego kits. Some of them more complicated. I'm sure I talked about the NES one. I built a Boba Fett helmet over the weekend. So I've enjoyed that a lot. Should we dive into the news?
I think we should just dive into the news.
Should we start with fun?
Yes, let's definitely start with the fun stuff.
All right. Do you want to go first?
Yes, my fun one actually provided literal laugh out loud moments, both just by myself reading it and sharing it with people that I know that live in the state of Michigan, because there was a drone being used by their, was it Environment Great Lakes and something else. Let me see, what was it? But anyway, the acronym is EAGLE. And so the Eagle drone got attacked by a bald eagle. It ripped out one of the propellers, causing it to spin down and sink into the Great Lake, and they were unable to recover because it landed in like 4 feet of water and then sunk into the mud.
That's amusing.
Which reminds me, like, was it two DEF CONs ago, 3 DEF CONs ago, where they did the anti-drone technology, and one of the anti-drone things they did was eagles attacking a drone, like trained attack eagles. Mm-hmm. Well, apparently they don't need much training.
I will see your eagle and raise you a new streaming service. So I think as anybody who looks around with HBO Max and Peacock and all this stuff, like there's always a new streaming service, right? Like it feels like everybody has a streaming service today. We're trading syndicated cable stations for streaming services. Correct. And one of my personal heroes, Ryan Reynolds, would agree. He put out a tweet that every tech company needs a streaming service. So he has created Mint Mobile Plus, the world's most affordable streaming service. And what you can do, ready for this? Binge over 80 minutes of Ryan Reynolds in 2003 DVD quality. So I actually did go check out this website, the Mint Mobile Plus website, and it looks so professional. Mint Mobile Plus Unoriginals. It's only got one movie, old heist movie that Ryan Reynolds did called Foolproof. I'm assuming that he bought the rights to that movie.
Yes.
I specifically so that he could do
much money either.
Probably not, because it's an old movie, and I've seen it. Like, it's not a bad movie.
Yeah,
but he's got like 10 or 15 different pictures for this movie, like different covers, to make it look different across the whole thing. So there's kind of originals, unoriginal originals. Top 10 in the US is 10 different covers for Foolproof.
Nice.
And then you can actually click on it and go watch Foolproof in, as he says, shitty 2003 DVD quality.
So it's like 480 at max.
Yeah, it's quite hilarious. And I honestly, it's a pretty good movie, and I haven't watched it in a long time, but I remember it not being that bad of a movie. So like, you can go watch Foolproof for free in the funniest way possible right now.
And you get to watch super young Ryan Reynolds figure out how to break into stuff and then get forced into actually doing it.
I think the first movie I actually saw him in was National Lampoon's Van Wilder.
A classic.
And I still love that movie too. But Foolproof came after that, and it's not that bad. He did a lot of really interesting movies really early on, but like this, like the dude is hilarious. And just doing this kind of really brought that up, that like, this is hilarious.
I mean, Blade 3, he was the best part of that entire movie.
He was really the only good part of that movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely accurate. So it's worth checking out. It's a good laugh. I laughed loudly and out loud.
Definitely one of those ones to try to figure out to do like a family remote viewing night with friends and stuff, and
right.
Have
and everybody go watch Foolproof from 2003.
Yes.
All right. So real news then, because we do have a lot of it.
Yes.
Let's see. Do you want to start or do you want me to?
I can bring us in.
Bring us in.
So how about we start in with something, let's see, that's the bald eagle. Let's work backwards. So I saw an article here about it was a ZDNet doing a summary of the FBI and NSA releasing information about this Linux-based malware. Let's see, Drovo Rub, used by, what is it, APT28? Yeah, okay. APT28, Fancy Bear, SEDNet. So like, specific Russian group that they're calling the Swiss Army knife for hacking Linux, as far as malware goes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So definitely got the ZDNet article here to kind of get the summary breakdown of it. They do have the link directly to their intelligence report, which is 45 pages long, apparently. And yeah, so I was trying to see if they gave some more specifics, but no, definitely go check it out because if you have a framework or a modular Linux based malware, it's going to be interesting to see how that ends up getting used.
For sure. We can stay on the APT train for a minute. Oil Rig, also known as APT 34, is the first attacker to weaponize DNS over HTTPS, which I do believe we said was probably going to happen.
Except they're first to market, so when
right?
they put in the infrastructure, they're going to get the that first to market bonus money.
And this one has a lot of really interesting pieces to it because when you do something like DNS to HTTPS, you're bypassing corporate DNS servers for the most part. So like when you're going over HTTPS, unless you're running unencryption, this becomes a lot more difficult to detect, and you're bypassing your own DNS, which means you can't block it at a DNS level, at your internal DNS level, right? It's not like you can black hole it because it's going over HTTPS, which is, all these browsers are starting to implement this functionality, which I think we talked about like last year or months and months ago about the potential security risks of doing this. So they've started to use DNS Exfiltrator, which is an open source project on GitHub. Of course it is. Why does that surprise anybody that it's a completely like proof of concept OST?
Maybe like we had a special guest on a few months ago that talked about this.
Right? They have a disclaimer. This tool is intended to be used in a legal and legitimate way only. Right on the GitHub. It's there. But of course, Oil Rig is using DNS Exfiltrator. So that's something that you can look for. The tool can transfer data between 2 points using classic DNS requests, but also now it can use the DNS over HTTP protocol. So they're using it to move data laterally across internal networks and then exfiltrate it to an outside port. So this is really the first time that I think it's been found that an attacker is doing this. The article is interesting. I would recommend reading it.
And then that brings up the nasty conversation that some organizations don't want to deal with is, do you strip the encryption with your web proxy and have full inspection so that humans can see in clear text what's passing through? I know some words are okay with it and some are not.
I also have to say I was wrong. They're the first APT group to use it. However, Godlua, a Lua-based Linux malware strain, was the first to deploy it as part of its DDoS botnet in July of 2019. So, this is ongoing. But this is the first APT group to get caught using it. Interesting article, definitely worth reading. Check it out. What's next, man?
So pivoting off the whole group using framework stuff, I don't know if other people caught this, but Sophos is how you say it, Sophos, recently released a report about Dharma ransomware as a service, where they break down, yeah. So, and they're saying the target audience for Dharma operations is where's the exact wording? Entry-level cyber criminals, provides a paint-by-the-numbers approach to penetrating victims' networks and launching ransomware attacks. So it comes prepackaged with scripts, gray hat tools that they say require very little skill to operate, uses Windows internal tools, so living off the land stuff, freeware software, PowerShell, AutoIt scripts. Yeah, so big.
You gotta love the word paint by numbers.
Yes. If this crimeware as a service is being focused for entry level cyber criminals, we could see like phishing, right? Like maybe ransomware is at the beginning of becoming so saturated with people. Like we see phishing now that it's just you deal with
Mhm.
so often. What they're saying here is the source code for one variant of Dharma was being sold on crime forums for 2,000 USD.
Okay. So let's stay on frameworks, shall we? On the good side of frameworks, MITRE has a new one out. We have MITRE Attack.
Yes, and then the ICS attack.
Yeah. Well, now we have MITRE Shield.
Oh, so before we get into it, they missed a renaming opportunity here. They
To call it Sword and Shield, all Marvel style.
Yeah, or Pokemon.
True. I was thinking Marvel, but
yeah.
So, Shield is an active defense knowledge base. So, active defense based on U.S. Department of Defense. This is all on their website, right? Employment of limited offensive action and counterattacks to deny contested area or position to an enemy. So we actually talked about this a bit, active defense before. So basically, they mapped it to attack. So you can look at attack mapping by tactic. You can look at initial access, and then you can look at opportunity space. So like if you look at T10078 valid accounts, there's an opportunity to introduce user accounts that are used to make a system look more realistic, and basically creating decoy user accounts. So they've got this entire mapping now on Shield that basically talks about active defense that you can use if you want to really build into the active defense space. It's actually super, super cool.
I when I was looking into it, I was pretty excited because this is an area that I've been like personally delving into. And I also like how they built these, what did they call them? Channels. So you could start from the attack side and like say pick valid accounts, and then they show you cyber deception or active defense technologies you can do with that. Or you can go to the channel and say, I want to look at deception based active defense technology. Then they break out like the channel names, and then when you dig into that, it gives you all of the related attack things in one. So instead of going from valid accounts, you're looking at like deception user accounts, and then they aggregate that across the entire attack framework instead of just initial access.
Yep. So definitely worth taking a look into. Kind of a really cool thing. Back to you.
All right. So, I as much as I try to stay away from home automation, more people are embracing home automation, like Amazon's Alexa. And Checkpoint released a vulnerability that they found in Amazon's Alexa that allowed someone to remotely take over. It was the voice aspect of Alexa.
Oh, interesting. Continue, if you have things to continue on.
Yeah, it said the vulnerability was existing in more than 200 million devices by the end of 2019.
Ooh, that's fun.
Yeah. Let's see, what was it? I was trying to get to the specifics here. So they patched it in June. So if someone has it, make sure you at least have it updated to June to take care of that. And it did require the user to click on a malicious link in order for them to access it. But it allowed the hackers to install or remove skills on Alexa devices, doing whatever they wanted. So they would use like the user's voice history to gather personal information, sensitive information like banking data, home addresses, stuff like that.
That makes sense. Should we stay on home automation for a minute then?
Yes.
Let's talk about a new one. We haven't talked about this one before, the August Smart Lock. Honestly, this is something that I've looked at more than once for like my own home, and it's interesting, but I'm going to think twice now. So old versions of the August Smart Lock were Bluetooth only, right? So you could only do things within Bluetooth when you were close. Their most recent lock is a Wi-Fi smart lock. So this is actually really interesting and kind of weird. So a report done by Bitdefender and PCMag together found a vulnerability in the smart lock that will not let people unlock your door, but will expose your Wi-Fi network credentials. So it gives the hacker a way to access Wi-Fi network credentials, but not the smart lock. So nobody can unlock your door, but they can access your internal network and wreak havoc.
Oh, Jesus.
Which is really kind of an interesting vulnerability, right? So it basically, I'm trying to figure out exactly how it works. So the key itself is encrypted using a simple cipher. So basically ROT13. So it saves your password in ROT13. And you can basically just grab passwords like that. The key that holds your network information is coded, but not really hidden. A diligent hacker watched your network and caught the moment of setup for your smart lock. They could intercept your Wi-Fi password through the smartphone's easily cracked encryption method. So it doesn't look like somebody can just scroll up to your house, but it does look like if somebody was kind of sniffing it when you were setting it up, they could grab it and intercept.
Or you could just do like you're setting up a man in the middle. You could just deauth the access point to force it to get reset up.
However, it only applies on the Android device because Apple has beefier security on their mobile devices. It's directly from the article. So,
I'm groaning because I still have a personal dislike of Apple mobile devices, but I can't deny that they're much better about mobile security.
Yeah. Well, there is that. And I mean, I'm an Apple user myself. So, should I dive into the actual Apple Android thing though? Like, it feels like a good segue.
Yeah, it does.
This is a big one. So Fortnite, every 12-year-old's favorite game in the world. If you have kids, I'm sure that they play Fortnite.
Isn't it also a popular place for money launderers to launder?
Fortnite is popular for money laundering. We talked about that, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
It's also the most popular game in the world right now. It's what launched Epic into gaming. So, we've been talking about the antitrust stuff and the App Store things and all that. And a lot of it's been focused on Apple because Apple's been taking a lot of the hit. But Google has the same 30% policy, right? So, like, both companies basically say in-app purchases, you're paying 30%. And apparently they both have the same policy to force you into in-app purchases. And this is why I say that. So Epic, on Fortnite, put in a new, an update to their game. Basically, they said, hey, you can buy through Apple or the Google store. It's going to be $10 for however many V-Bucks that they have in Fortnite, which is how they launder the money, by the way. Or you can go this side load method and you can pay $7, 30% off. Well, I wonder where they got that number from. In response, Apple and Google have banned Fortnite from their stores. Remember, this is the largest game in the world. And Apple and Google both said, yeah, no, we don't care. And they removed it from the store. Epic was ready for this because they had so Apple did an old 1984 Inspire ad way back when. They basically parodied that ad in the game.
You mean the Ridley Scott 1981 intro Apple to the market 1984?
I think so. So Epic basically completely and totally parodied that to people and were like, we have to take down these companies, blah, blah, blah. So all this is going on, right? They were ready for it. I swear Epic was ready for this fight because there's no way they would have had that Fortnite 1984 Apple parody video if they weren't ready for it.
Yeah.
And they also simultaneously filed suit against both Google and Apple. So Epic is suing Google and Apple over anti-competitive behavior after they removed Fortnite. So Fortnite you can still get on Android, but it's no longer in the Play Store, and you can't get it on Apple anymore, so you can't update it or do any of that stuff. Google has said... Google's statement was, Fortnite remains available on Android. We can't make it available on Play because it violates our policies. However, we welcome the ability to continue talking. Epic Games said basically that they're sick of smartphone makers being able to do whatever they want, and they're going to fight to defend it, and they're starting a hashtag of free Fortnite, and they're saying this is just $1 billion company fighting a $1 trillion company about money. So, like, at least he acknowledges that it's a $1 billion company fighting a $1 trillion company about money. Because that's what it is.
Even though those are both big numbers, like in the theater that they operate in as companies, it's like a David and Goliath situation. Who's just like, you know what? Fuck you.
I mean, I think they wanted this fight. I really do. Like, my guess is that they wanted this fight. And I read, and this is actually worth kind of focusing on for a little bit as we talk about it, because it's a really interesting topic. So I was reading, now, first I want to say, like, I am perfectly fine with, like, one of the things that I would like to see on Apple is an app store, and then I would like to see, like, not app store. Like, I would like to see third-party app stores as an option for those who want it, right? Just like I have on my computer. However, that's really the issue with Apple, to me, is that there's no third-party option. So there's no way around it. I don't necessarily think it's unreasonable for them to take a cut, though, for curating the content, for managing and hosting it, for doing all the things that they do in the App Store as it exists, right? Like, they are making sure that that environment is safe and decent and curated and all these other things. Not necessarily wrong for them to take a cut of that, even from the in-app purchases, for all I give a shit. I don't really care. However, I think the problem that I still continue to have is that there's no other option. So if Apple decides, we don't support you, you're fucked.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like that. Like, specifically that. As a technical person, I would like to be able to download Bill's App Store or whatever and get whatever the fuck I want on my phone.
We're taking on the risk at that point, right? So the normal
Correct.
consumer can stick with the Apple, know that they're generally safe, don't have to worry about malware, but if I want to go somewhere else, I am accepting that risk.
Correct. Now, the problem is that basically all the app makers are going to move out of the App Store if they don't have to pay for something by going somewhere else, which is going to force the average consumer over there. So I totally understand that as well. Because what happens when Fortnite says, okay, well, we're just not going to be on the App Store anymore, then you're going to have to install it this way, which they probably will, because they don't want to they don't want to lose 30%. Who wants to lose 30%, right? And 30% admittedly is a little bit high, but, you know, Apple and Google do a lot to curate their stores. Google, I don't know. There's malware on Google all the time. So I really don't know how much Google does to curate their stores.
Yes.
But
I think they curate when they get a report of something violating.
I'm trying to throw them a bone here. And I mean, I'm sure that they spend a lot of time trying to clean up malware when they get reported malware. So I understand their desire to take a cut of this stuff because they've got to pay people to do this. And these platforms are massive. So I bet there's a huge number of people who are doing this stuff, right? Who are working this thing. So I get it. Like, they're basically playing customer support for all these companies in making sure that the apps are stable, making sure that they work, making sure that there's not malware, pulling them if there is malware. Like, I totally get it. And it was a, reverse opinion that I had read. And I'm like, this makes a lot of sense. But I wonder if this is the next step towards open applications on mobile that we're starting to come to. And I don't necessarily think that would be a bad thing either, because I think putting risk in the user's hands has benefit. And like we said it before when the antitrust stuff came up, or I did, I'd love to be able to install whatever the hell I want on my iPad. I probably wouldn't fuck with my phone because it's my phone. Like, it's more important. But my iPad, like, I'd install all the shit.
Mm-hmm.
But this is going to be a really, really interesting thing, I think. And this is going to be probably huge for the world going forward and for mobile because, mobile has changed the world in so many ways. And the fact that mobile is largely a controlled ecosystem between Google Play, even though, Android is more open, and Apple, I think some of these court cases and things are going to potentially completely change mobile as we know it or cement where we are today.
Yeah, and this is coming up right on the heels of that antitrust hearing.
Correct.
Facebook, Google, Apple, and...
Which is why I think Epic knows what they're doing. Like, I really think they did this after the antitrust hearing on purpose to add fuel to the fire. I really, really do.
I mean, it's a pretty big contrast, right? Like how some of the protests that are out and they're trying to contrast with the the non-violence with the police, like it's the same, like they're setting up that same kind of contrast of, look, here's this bad guy doing this bad thing, and we're just trying to be the good guy over here.
Yeah. Our $1 billion good company is fighting this bad trillion dollar bad company.
Yep.
Oh, the fun issues of people with money. But I think it's going to be really interesting. It's going to be really interesting to follow. And I would encourage people from a privacy, from a safety, there's going to be a lot of stuff that comes out of this, especially in like how tech controls the world. And while not directly in line with information security, I think it will ripple through information security for years to come. Because imagine if we do get to a place where you have the ability to install your own applications. That's going to have huge implications, like not only my own desire, but that's going to have huge implications on InfoSec. We're going to see literally probably a huge pivot towards phone malware. That, I mean, we already see it in Google, but we'll see, like if Apple is on it too, especially with how much Apple is used in business, we will see a massive pivot on phone malware and stuff.
And it also puts it in like a logical line of the fake technology that was designed for the game Watch Dogs slowly becoming a real thing.
Yep. And given that, like, for the most part, monitoring and controls around phone kind of suck.
And yeah, especially with the multipathing that they have. So like, it could be split, and you won't actually get to see everything that's going on because some of it goes through the 4G, 5G data, and then some of it goes through a Wi-Fi connection.
And that's the thing. So like anything that's going through 4G, 5G, you're never going to see. So your only real goal is endpoint, and endpoint stuff on phones is woefully behind the times. Mm-hmm. So like to bring this back to the InfoSec side of the conversation, what comes out of this will ultimately determine safety of phones going forward. And while I would like my phone to be a little bit more open and a little bit less safe, my security brain and my corporate brain that says I kind of know what I'm doing, most people don't. So it's going to be really, really interesting where this goes if safety in phones goes down, because I think we'll see way more vendors creating phone-based products, a lot more snake oil, a lot more issues, you know, a lot less visibility into data, so on and so forth. So like, I'm just trying to bring this back into security for all those people being like antitrust in gaming. That's not what this podcast is about. But anyway, back to you.
So, I have an interesting thing here that also has a potential effect on the InfoSec community itself, in that FireEye has moved at least a portion of their bug bounty program from being private through BugCrowd to being public. They only have like their domains in scope right now, but with the public announcement, they said that's going to grow with the services. Oh, here it is. They're going to expand the program to include products and services in the coming months.
Yeah, I don't know that that'll have a huge impact across the security landscape, but I do think it's definitely interesting. And it's another vendor coming into public bug bounty and coming into a more open bug bounty program, which will be interesting to see what is found. Yeah,
though I think because they're saying like it's up to 2,500 for critical vulnerabilities. I don't know how much like they're gonna catch people trying to do that, because isn't that kind of like on the really low end for criticals?
It's kind of on the low end for critical, and if everything lines up right, we're actually going to be interviewing somebody who runs a huge bug bounty program next week. Probably the biggest bug bounty program in the world. At least I think it was rated that way. Full disclosure, like the person works at the same company as me. So, you know, Verizon Media does run like the world's largest bug bounty program, but he's a really good person to talk to about bug bounty. So like next week, we'll pull back the layer on bug bounty. Hopefully.
Yeah, we don't want to actually go making promises if we're not sure we can keep them quite yet.
We're pretty sure. So it's likely that will be our guest next week. But you never know, man. Things change. How many more do you have? Because I got 3.
I got 3 also.
Perfect. All right, cool. So, bug bounty. Let's talk about this is a loose pivot, but it's an interesting pivot at the same time. So we have a breach to talk about. And this is actually really interesting to talk about because we can start talking about different kinds of breaches, right? And what different breaches mean. So SANS, the security training firm, was hit with a data breach. Let's dissect that for a minute. Phishing attack. It allowed an attacker to compromise an employee's email environment, like one account, and basically set up an auto forward rule that sent stuff out and sent out however many emails. And they're basically anticipating that 513 emails were forwarded. Most were harmless. Some had files with PII. Approximately 28,000 PII records were sent. No passwords, no financial information, but it did have things like email, work title, first and last name, work phone, company name, industry, address, and country of residence. 1 second. I think I need to sneeze. No, it's passed, but it might come. So if I disappear momentarily, that's why. This one becomes really interesting because this type of breach is not horribly uncommon. But this is kind of a big deal for a couple of reasons. One, if somebody decides to sell this list or something, you're basically getting a lot of members of internal security teams at different companies, which means it's highly targeted, right? If somebody were to buy this, it's a highly targeted list. But this kind of data breach happens all the time. I was watching Mythic Quest yesterday, and I laughed my ass off at one point. Spoilers. So, like, for the next 15 seconds, if you haven't watched Mythic Quest, and I strongly suggest you do, mute me. They talk about, like, the company gets hacked, right? And they're like, oh my God, the company got hacked. This is such a big deal. And the creative director guy goes, it's not a big deal. Companies get hacked all the time. Nobody cares. What do you mean? What companies get hacked? He's like, Target. Okay, what other companies get hacked? Equifax. And he just goes into a list of like 15 different companies. And they're like, oh, you're right. Nobody cares. Which just, I laughed my ass off during that section. But this one becomes really interesting because ultimately it's not necessarily just what was stole that matters. This is a reputation type issue, right? And this is where I think SANS is going to see it. So, like, you know, when you hack a company or when a company gets breached, several different things can happen. You can make off with very sensitive data, company secrets, things of that nature. You can get lists of other companies. You can, so you can steal, you can finance, you can shut down and basically lock out and hold ransom. Or you can damage your reputation. So one email account got hacked. Not super uncommon. One auto forward rule was created. Probably not super uncommon. But the fact of the matter is it's SANS. So, like, reputationally, this hurts.
Yeah.
But I would ask that people remember that, like, this is not incredibly uncommon. It's not like there's some huge insecure practice at SANS. Basically, don't hang SANS for it. Like, it's a very common attack vector that happens all the time. But because they're a training vendor, many of you may hang them anyway. Because, oh, you teach me how to be safe from this, and here you go. You're like... totally you fell for the same thing. Like, I get it, but it gets really interesting because you're talking about that variance of, yes, anybody who took a SANS class, and I think they're emailing individuals who are affected, should be on the hyper lookout for phishing and stuff, just in case this list gets sold and somebody uses it to target the company that you're at through you, right? But on the other hand, like, it's one email account on an auto forward rule.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and like, this is another opportunity to be mindful of a thing that we talk about in various forms, and that's the scope of the breach. Take a look at the scope of the information that was taken, and from what I remember reading on the initial reports is that it was just like who took, like, just a small collection of who took what course or what certification they had.
Pretty much.
And nothing, like, no real private information about those people. It was more of just a collection of who had what or who had taken what kind of course.
The private information would be companies that they work for and titles and things of that nature that are not necessarily going to affect you negatively if you were affected, but could affect the company that you work for. So, like, that's something interesting and worth thinking about. And that's an interesting piece. But this one becomes really interesting because I don't know that I've ever seen such a good example of a reputation-based incident than this one.
Yeah. Because the technical aspect of it is not
at all complicated.
Yeah, it's not at all complicated, yeah.
So, What else you got?
All right. So I got a couple of tools here. And I'm gonna start with one that I thought was interesting. Um, as more people talk about this threat intelligence and figuring out how to integrate threat intelligence, um, there's a common issue with as companies embrace this, how do you get all of these disparate sources into a single viewable area in order to filter through stuff? Well, it looked like someone who did the Google Summer of Code and built this tool called Intel Owl, where they aggregate all multiple or ton of sources into a single, looks like elastic Logstash combination, um, so that you have a single view, and they do a bunch of API calls to like Virus Total, Hybrid Analysis, Shodan, in order to get extra information or to pull from like public lists. So you set up all the API keys for some of these services. And it does like has some free modules to do like static doc and RTF analysis, like a bunch of stuff that then just becomes a single place that you can go to deal with your threat intelligence.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, and they have some pretty good documentation too, where they list out the different tools that have different licensing. So they have a pretty good legal notice of here's all the things that are taken. These are the different ones that have different licensing. So if someone's considering using it in a commercial or a corporate environment, like you can go there to really dig in to figure out if it's something that you can do based on licensing.
Okay. Nice. So I don't have a good pivot, but I got a cool binary defense thing. So researchers exploited a bug in Emotet that basically dead stops its spread. And this is, Dave Kennedy's team binary defense over there, and this is where I saw it. So
that's the blue side of Trusted Sec.
Right? So they found a kill switch in Emotet and found a flaw that basically turned on this kill switch. There's a new feature that came into Emotet to leverage already infected devices to identify and compromise fresh victims connected to Wi-Fi. And a new persistence mechanism that generated a file name to save the malware on each victim's system using randomly generated chosen exe or DLL system file names from System 32. Pretty straightforward, but the kill switch, which went live about 37 hours after the changes, employed a PowerShell script that would generate the registry key value for each victim and set the data for each value to null. That way, when the malware checked registry for a file name, it would load an empty exe, thus stopping the malware from running on the system. So, super nice. Cool work by the folks over at Binary Defense, and I think there's a second one that they did as well. And they actually, this has been going on for a long time. I think, Emotet just retired it and basically removed the vulnerable registry value code recently, which is why this became public. It was on August 6th. They were silently sending this out to a bunch of different people over the last 6 months as to not let them on. But, super cool thing and definitely worth reading about, and really, really good work from that team.
Yeah, it is a pretty awesome report, and it's good. Now, I'm actually going to take my next two and combine them into one, looking at the time here so we can get onto the topic. So they're both related in the sense that it's hunt training related. So the first thing here is there's this group called Cyber Defenders, where they made a virtual machine available for download for Boss of the SOC. So for those who are unfamiliar with Boss of the SOC, it's a Splunk SOC competition, similar to Open SOC and finding stuff. And normally you have to take part in one of their events in order to do it. But having this available as a virtual machine, so that you could do offline practice.
Yeah, you don't have to do any of the setup yourself, and it's super dope.
And the setup can be hell cumbersome because depending on the Splunk environment, it can take some time.
Now, do you want to give a shout out to the company that's doing it? Because it's not Splunk that released this. It's a different company.
It was cyberdefenders.org. So it's a separate organization that focuses entirely on making training environments for Blue Team.
So, awesome work to them, and shout out to them as well, because that's super dope.
And the last thing I have here is I came across...
No. Don't do the last thing, because I have to pivot into the news for the main topic. So let me do my next one first. And I'll be real quick on this one. So the Twitter hacks, right? We've talked about the Twitter hacks a bit.
Yep.
We've talked about Zoom bombing a bit. Well, they meshed. A virtual bail hearing happened on Wednesday for the 17-year-old who was accused of the Twitter hack.
Mm-hmm.
It got Zoom bombed to hell. So uninvited guests played loud rap music, screams, and porn as the judge struggled to issue a ruling. And there were a bunch of people in there with like BBC News, Fox 5 News, like definitely like fake people in there saying that they were from different news articles. So like it got Zoom bombed to hell and back. But that's it. It's just something amusing to mention.
That's the original hacker culture right there.
Right?
So I have a hunting thing where I came across this article where they actually break down 3 current CVEs. While it's specifically about SQL injections and WordPress plugins, which we know WordPress, I mean, it's the heavy bag to practice boxing on for compromises, right?
Oh, God, yeah.
But this article actually does a pretty good breakdown on how to go and hunt for these SQL injections. Even though it's for specific plugins, it's the methodology that they really detail down on that I think is really important for people to check out and look at, because what you learn about how to check for SQL injections from this is very much applicable to multiple web servers or application servers.
Okay, nice. All right, so that takes me to my last one then, because this is the one that we're going to kind of go off of the topic on.
Yes.
To a certain extent. So Mozilla, the company, and I don't know if I actually talked about this here or not. I think I did. I recently switched off of Mozilla because I just can't anymore. Like it was running way too slow. Like I switched to Firefox Quantum and it worked really, really good. And then suddenly it didn't work really, really good. So I switched off. So Mozilla is apparently suffering pretty serious dwindling of use in the browser and has cut 25% of their workforce after the pandemic has hit their revenue. That's about a quarter of their workforce, 25. So like 250 jobs is a quarter of their workforce. So they're dropping down to about 750 people and making some changes to try to get to like profit, like actually being a profit centric company, because they don't really make any money and they're hurting. And I wish I could see, like, I can't get the other thing to load, but part of that cut is apparently some of their security folks who are going to be looking for work. So basically somebody from Twitter has said they killed the entire threat management team. Mozilla is now without detection and incident response. Everybody up to and including their new director are gone. So it looks like they got rid of their entire cybersecurity group. That brings into the interesting thing to talk about, because it's probably worth talking about if you were going to try to downsize your company and you were going to look at it from that. What functions should you absolutely have versus what functions do you not necessarily need to have in a cybersecurity space, right?
Yeah. Now specifically they said it was their incident response team and not the entirety of their cybersecurity.
So this person has said the entire threat management team, no detection or incident response.
Oh, I did not catch that.
So this person who was there said detection and incident response.
Ooh, detection and response. Eesh.
Correct. So that becomes really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, yeah, you can outsource to an MSSP. You can outsource and use a cybersecurity vendor, and you can do IR retainers with companies. You can basically outsource all this stuff for a certain amount of money. But I think you have to have some, internal ability to respond, because most of these companies are not actually going to respond, right?
Yeah. I mean, like if you use cyber insurance, let's say that they just cut the IR function and lean on the cyber insurance, which forces them to work with a contracted or a small number of IR companies. that only comes once they have an active incident. Well, you still need the detection piece on that in order to find out when an incident's happening.
I've actually been long opposed to cyber insurance choosing the IR vendor, to be completely honest.
Mm-hmm.
I interviewed for a couple IR like consultant jobs who got most of their most of their user base through insurance inquiries, and that becomes a really interesting topic because, and we're gonna pivot to that for a second. So, if me at my company hires a IR consulting service to come in and work an incident, right? They work for me. They do what I need. If I have ABC insurance and ABC says you must hire this person and it's part of your insurance payout, they don't work for me. They work for ABC Insurance, which means they're going to interface with the insurance company. They're going to work with them. They're not necessarily going to work with me as a technical team. And they're probably going to be asked to look for certain faults. And it gets really, really interesting. And I'm actually kind of opposed. Like I'm kind of fine with, insurance companies saying that it has to be this level of vendor or whatever. But I'm not necessarily cool with the IR team working for the insurance company. Something doesn't feel right to me about that. Mm-hmm. Because it doesn't feel like fixing the breach is the number one priority at that point.
It just becomes about the risk management for the insurance company itself.
Correct. Which, if you are a customer-centric organization in any way, shape, or form, that means that the individual people's data does not matter in that equation. Right?
Yep.
It's all about the insurance claim. But I digress.
Yeah, or even individual services.
Correct. I digress, though. That's a topic for a different day, or a topic that we can expand on later if people want to expand on it later. But let's talk about what functions must you have at a company to be even minimally effective. Fully understanding that you and I, Exiled, and a lot of the people who listen to this probably work in this industry to a point that, they don't see the real thing. And we talked to Andrew Thompson about this a lot. Like, we are the 1%.
Yeah.
With funded teams that do cool stuff, not just one sysadmin who's doing fucking security work. But best case scenario, which is arguably not going to be met 99% of the time, I would think a detection team is important, or outsourcing to an MSSP. As much as I disagree with the concept of outsourcing to an MSSP, sometimes it has its benefits, especially if you don't have anybody who actually knows security. Like, how are you going to know that you're even hiring somebody decent at that point who can actually build something that's viable? Instead, you trust an outsourced vendor. But detection and response, I think, is important. IR, you probably don't need in-house. That has its pros and cons. That has... Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think specifically with detection, you can run... I think a hybrid on the detection side works the best. You could have a small group of people that work a single shift. So in the event of an incident, you have people that maintain that business risk themselves. So you have someone there who's got the business interest in mind, working with your MSSP, and the same with the IR function. I think if you could minimize it down, you could just have one person that has the knowledge that then becomes that internal liaison with the external team to help balance out the risk priorities of the various companies involved.
To be honest, those can be the same thing.
Yep.
So your detection person, your internal detection person, and your internal IR person can be the same person. You can have somebody internally who's doing this work, and they can work on it, and you can outsource to an MSSP or something who's kind of feeding you what it is that you should be looking at or looking into or whatever the case may be. So ultimately, you could do it with like one person if you're a small company. Should you? Well, that depends on your company. Like, as we all know, security is not going to be a long-time priority across the board. For a company like Mozilla, that's a 1,000-person company that's really just not making money, I can totally see why they make that decision.
Yeah.
Do I think it's smart for them to make that decision in terms of the data that they protect? Not necessarily. But I would hope that they would release a statement saying that they're going to go with an MSSP or something. But they probably won't. But, I hope that they're at least going to outsource, which, all we know is that they let people go. We don't know if they're actually going to outsource.
Yeah, what the follow up is, and if we continue down the vein for the rest of the blue team, the defense side there, if we think about vulnerability management, like could
Yep.
you effectively outsource vulnerability management also?
You can. At least you can totally outsource the finding of vulnerabilities, and then that one person can manage the patching cycle and doing some of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Which is arguably how it's run in most places. You have one like sysadmin / security person, and you might outsource who's doing vulnerability management, who's doing, notices that come from the MSSP, and who's working on incidents.
Their threat intelligence. So you have like one, maybe two
company
people.
like that, you're not doing shit with threat intel. Not realistically, right? Like, I appreciate the value of threat intel, but is one of the last things that I would add to a company.
I don't disagree. But we are also like, I've also seen and heard a number of executives who brought it up, right? So 1,000 people, there may be some project that either got implemented with threat intelligence or was in the process of being implemented, like funding paid for already. So that's why I started out there, that to me, it's not unreasonable to have those medium-sized businesses like that to have something in place, even if we agree that it is a lower priority compared to the others.
The problem is Intel's expensive. If you outsource it, it's going to be more than your average MSSP for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to outsource like a real Intel feed, a decent one. So you pull in some of the OSINT stuff, you look at something like MISP. Maybe your MSSP has an offering that does something similar. Most of them do. I value the Intel side of the world, but I'm an operational person. Like, Intel is my last priority. If I have the money, it's really cool to know who might attack me and what they might go for and stuff like that. But if I don't have the money, well, I'd rather have somebody who can respond to something and clean it up quickly and in a relatively safe time frame, right? Like, that's the bigger priority to me as an operational person, is that, like, do I have somebody who can actually be on the fence and like be in the weeds and handling that shit?
So what I'm hearing us saying is that we could actually function in a majority of businesses with a small to almost virtually non-existent team.
Pending that you're outsourcing stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
It's possible, and I think it happens every day. Is it ideal? No, probably not. Because an MSSP is never going to care for you like you care for you. And an IR consultant is going to have its pros and its cons. They're going to have more power because they're an external resource, but they're not going to know the network. So they're not going to be familiar. So, like, pros and cons, right? But I think most companies function with probably around one person who's maybe not even fully dedicated to security. And they function okay. It might not be the best case scenario, but it's possible. And, I understand Mozilla making the choices that they're making, because they're not a huge company, they're not a profitable company, and they've got to cut. So, if you can take your $1 million budget in security and go to a MSSP for 80 grand a year or 100 grand a year, like, why wouldn't you do that if you're trying to free up some budget? Like, understanding it's not the InfoSec, like, that's not the InfoSec opinion, but the business part of me totally gets that.
Yeah, it just shows that businesses still see the information security side as a cost center.
Well, because it is.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be treated that way, but it is.
Yeah. So the other thing I'm thinking, since Mozilla is trying to pivot to being profitable, and so which means they're going to be developing software to sell, and I saw that they're looking at focusing on a VPN service. Now, what I hope they didn't do for their own safety is also cut the security-focused app developers and reviewers to...
I mean, you can make up some of that with a bug bounty program, too, though.
Yeah, but we haven't seen anything about that, right? Like, we haven't seen a Mozilla bug bounty program plugging into anything, just that it's cut. So that's
Well, we haven't even seen that their app security team is cut, just their threat detection team. Right? So there's a lot that we don't know, and a lot that we'll never know, because, like, they're not going to release that shit.
Yeah.
There's no way. Mozilla totally does have a bug bounty program, though. I just looked it up.
But yeah, so that's just a concern, right? So if their secure developers were part of that threat detection team, we don't know. Like, we don't know how it was organized.
Exactly. But it does look like you can do it for pretty cheap, depending on the size of your company. Like where I work, like one person, no way in hell. Like one or two people, no way.
So the thing I was thinking is the place where that does exist on a fairly regular basis is like a network or sysadmin that's also doing security are schools and education.
Oh god, yeah, schools, education, smaller corporations, especially ones with less to really consider or less data that they have. Mm-hmm. Typically not like your internet sector or your giant company sector, but in a lot of smaller companies, I think that's what you're going to see. Like if you go work for Bill's Textiles or something, right? Or whatever. Or
any logistics company.
Hospitals, probably not dissimilar from a budgetary perspective. I mean, hospitals do a little bit better. They usually have a team of a couple, but they're not huge teams in what I've seen. Yeah. So, I mean, hopefully that was a good talk for that. So let's do the detection.
Yes. And we want to thank the, I forgot who it was that brought it to our attention about the Mozilla news to begin with.
I don't remember either.
But it was definitely the Dead Pixel Set community. So shout out to DPS.
Absolutely. You want to take away the detection?
Yeah. So part of the news actually reminded me of something that I don't think we've covered about detection, and it was the SANS event, right? So we saw this in action, and it's a pretty easy, typically fairly high fidelity because most organizations by policy either don't allow it or explicitly deny it, but it's checking your logs, checking mail forwarding rules for user mailboxes. Because if it's coming from your internal domain and going to anything that's not also your internal email domain, that should be anomalous and definitely checked into. And as we saw, leads to data breaches.
And this one gets particularly interesting because even if it's not quote unquote malicious, like external attacker, somebody forwarding their personal email to their work email to their personal account is also like an insider threat problem. Right?
Yeah, I was just going to say that also starts to step into the insider threat detection also.
Exactly. So like definitely something to look into and something worth looking into. And one of those easier ones that like, even I admit, like until I read the SANS thing, like I forget about that stuff.
Yeah. And I know like for a lot of businesses are going to like Google Business, Office 365. I know in the Office 365, the logging for mail forwarding rules is fairly like they have it fairly well documented. Yeah. So if you're using something like a Elk Stack or Splunk or even a more traditional sim like QRadar, they have plenty of information on helping get those logs into whatever tool you're using.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think with that, that's our show.
Yes. That was a lot of news.
Yes, it was. I mean, that's what happens, right?
Yeah.
But go ahead, take us out.
So thanks, everyone, for listening again. Hopefully, I'm looking forward to the special guest as long as we can nail it down. That'll be good. That'll be exciting. Hope everyone's staying safe out there, wearing masks when they're in public as they go forth and find badness.